Morning, Graham Vincent, violin maker and musician. Hi guys, hope everything's well. It's Q&A time again. So I've brought my little laptop into the workshop, opened up the last two videos, and I'm just going to work my way through some of these questions and see what gives. Basically, I haven't really planned anything. So I like your humour. Good vid. That's not really a question, but thank you. It's just that's just me, I'm afraid, warts and all. Here you go. Helen G 2274. Oh, this was about a comment. Someone asked me if I thought of my violins as being particularly English, and I was kind of saying, don't know really. I was thinking of your violins as very English. They're made in your beautiful cottage in the heart of Somerset, beautiful West Country. It is. Helen, it sounds like you might be biased, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. Often with your reclaimed bits of local timbers, and I don't think you can get more English than that. Well, that's lovely. And I mean, basically, as I've said before, I think the fact if there is regional variation and a real identity to different violins from different places, that's just wonderful. I mean, what better? What better? Not saying any one type of regional violin is better than another, because I really don't want to fall into the sort of Cremona trap of saying everything from Cremona is great and everything else is rubbish. No, not at all. But it's fabulous if there is some small level of variation and regional identity. I like that. Sticulari, regarding borax, the crystal basic powder form is very difficult to obtain now in the UK. It's been superseded by boric acid, a more refined and costly version. I didn't know that. I must admit, I bought my stock. I think I got about a kilo of good old borax in crystal form, which is going to see me out, in all honesty. And there'll probably be 900 grams left for whoever follows. Yeah, Gervais Gallant. Hi Graham, a couple of Q&As ago, you talked about the quality of your first fiddle build. I did. Wondering if you could talk about common problems amateurs and hobbyists run into when building. I decided, for example, that working with highly figured maple was not going to work for me and moved to plain backs, sides and neck from silver birch, which is a locally available hardwood. Are there any other decisions and or limitations hobbyists might think about? Yeah, I think that small point about timber is not a small point. Those highly figured maples are very expensive. Not only that, but they're also quite hard to work. So it might well be sensible not to go out. I know it's tempting. You're going to make yourself this amazing violin. It's tempting to go out and buy an AAA grade, master grade, kind of incredibly highly figured back ribs and neck block. And it's going to cost you a load of money. And then you're going to make a couple of mistakes probably, and you're going to want to make a second violin, and actually you probably would have done better to have made your mistakes on just an A grade piece of timber. Would have been easier to work and wouldn't have cost you so much. In terms of other things and problems that okay, well, setting up neck angles, making sure the neck is straight, making sure that the height at the bridge is correct. That seems to be one that people often fall foul of. So that takes some careful consideration. And the way, I mean, other violin makers may scream in anger at this, but for me, the angle of the neck isn't a set thing. It's not crucial. But what I try to do is make sure the projection of the bridge is actually, is absolutely correct. And off the top of my head, what's that? 27 mil from a line projected through from a ruler sat on the fingerboard would be 27 mil at the bridge. I think that's right. Something like that. Look it up. It's on my plans. Why don't I look it up? I've got my plans here. 27 mil, yeah. And of course, if you vary the height of the arching, that would mean the neck angle has to change. So for me, that's driven by the arching rather than any specific kind of idea of what that angle of the neck always has to be. So that's one thing, getting that you know, so you don't have the strings a mile above the sort of the fingerboard, making the whole thing difficult or useless. So that's certainly one. Another one that springs to mind is people, and I see this fairly regularly. There's a fly buzzing around again. This is one of the joys of this workshop. It's nice and warm in here. It's cold outside. There are some holes in the door. All the flies come in. But corners on fiddles. These things, the corners, people, because in traditional violin making, your mold kind of dictates all the shape. You make your mold, put corner blocks on, you shape that, then that gives shape to the rib garland. That then informs the shape of the front and back plates, and you do that by sort of running around generally with using a pencil with a washer sort of laid flat on the board, so that gives you that lovely offset all the way around. But it's very tempting just to run around the corners. But don't do that. You've got to actually sort of create a nice shape at that point. And so that one of the things I do see fairly regularly is sort of, how can I put this? Those corners not looking as good as they could have done with a little bit more understanding of what you need to do. And always it's a question of just thinking of things through several times and referring to source material. You know, look at pictures of violins, look at what you've just marked out and think, that doesn't look as nice as that. Why? Before you start cutting, work out why and change it, because it's really, really easy to cut stuff and it's really difficult to turn back the clock or glue timber back on. Okay, so yeah, I mean those are, I mean there's always a new and exciting way to make mistakes. I've made many, I'm sure all of us have, but those, you know, for starter for 10, those two are ones that I see fairly regularly. Okay, Andrew Parish. Hi Graham, where in the UK can you buy wood from and what is a reasonable price? Oh, gosh, that's a difficult question. When I was at the London College of Furniture making musical instruments, John Dyke down in Sussex had just started up, and so I've kind of, when I've bought stuff from a specialist sort of tonewood supplier, it tends to be from him, or Touchstone Tonewoods is another one, although the nature of their business has changed over the years. But generally I now kind of shy away from buying from specialist tonewood dealers, and I generally go searching for all sorts of sources for timber. I've bought stuff off eBay successfully, bought stuff from the local timber yard. As you know, I use a large percentage of what I do is now made using reclaimed timber, so that's often just a question of having a look at what's available on Facebook. Sort of marketplace, believe it or not, is a fantastic source of really cheap, good quality timber if you're prepared to do a little bit of trawling. Local auctions, stuff like that. So that's, yeah, I'm probably, if you wanted the absolute standard answer, I'm not really the person to ask, but that's how I do it. Killer Sugar 6816, great name there. Is there an advantage to a spiral versus straight reamer? So a reamer is basically a tapered kind of drill sort of thing, and you use it for you know, putting peg holes in, and also the end pin in the bottom of the violin. And yes, a lot of the designs have a sort of straight cuts. Some have curves, a spiral. An advantage to a spiral versus a straight reamer. I have no idea. I've only ever used the straight one. with mixed results. They're not the easiest. It's depending on the type of timber you're using. You've got to be a little bit careful how you use them. So I don't know whether a spiral one would be better. I'd be very interested to hear from anyone who does use a spiral one, or has used both ideally, what your opinion is. Douglas Madlocks 3929. Graham, do you think the borax has any colour stay properties? Meaning, do you think that it helps the colours not fade from the wood after being applied? I have no idea. I don't know. What I was saying about the preservative effect of borax was simply in, borax and salt in this sort of tea mixture on the shelf it stops the tea precipitating out, it stops it going off. So in that respect, it has a sort of preservative effect. I was saying also that I think that there is borax, you can find traces of borax in some old violins, was simply because they were using it as a sort of a wood preservative to deter sort of wood boring insects. But whether it has any effect, to actually slow or stop the fading of natural colorings, I don't know. It's a really interesting question. If you look at what wool dyers do and all the rest of it, and the history of actual sort of colouring and stains is a very long and interesting one, and huge amounts of money have been put into colours over the years, haven't they? Literally from the sort of the purple robes of Roman emperors. Red madder is always one that's often quoted. It's one of the very, very light fast kind of stains that's used by some people in violin making, and it's the same stain that was used in the classic British Army red sort of field jackets. I have got a load of it on a shelf there, it's still in its root form, that I bought a few years ago, and I must admit I haven't yet got round to using, because in all honesty I don't use much red at all in that's another fly, same one. I don't use much red at all in my finishes. I tend to rely more on the sort of natural browning as oil is heated to sort of give the characteristic sort of colour that I like. Right. Okay, DIY Dark Matter, who often sends in a good question. Do you think a deeper arch, or more of an arch, so to speak, would lend more voice to the instrument? And if so, why don't more people make them that way? Looks like I've got another question as well. Okay, yeah. So, I actually think it's the other way around. If you look at Stradivarius, everyone slavishly copies Stradivarius and is frightened of making any changes to anything he did, but Stradivarius spent his whole life making incremental changes, changing things, testing stuff, changing stuff, increasing the length of his violins, reducing them again. But one thing in his life, early on, he had a very substantial deep arching, and over the years it got flatter and flatter and flatter. And what you tend to find is the flatter the arch, the more voice, the louder, the more shout, if you like, the instrument has. And so there's a balance. You can't just make it completely flat, because it's just not much character and a lot of noise. So to make it sound nice and violin-y, there's a sort of balance. But the deeper arching, and a lot of the sort of lovely the early German instruments had really very deep arching, and their sound was much loved. In fact, at one stage, I think it was Hopf violins were worth more than Stradivarius violins, because they liked the sound more, because they had a really rich, sweet kind of sound, although it wasn't as loud. But as the uses of the violin in music have changed over the years, and as people have gone from small chamber groups playing in Baron so-and-so's sort of castle. Is that fly buzzing around? Playing in Baron so-and-so's castle, or Prince, whatever, to large concert halls, the sweet small voice of some of those highly arched instruments was taken over, trampled on by the sort of louder, flatter arched instruments, which had much greater ability to travel, to project the sound. But at some point I'm going to have to stop this recording and go and try and swat this fly that's wandering around. Anyway, you've probably heard enough about the fly in the workshop. Another question from DIY Dark Matter. Yeah, I mean, he's talking about electric violins basically, and what he sees some being mic'd and some with pickups. Yeah, I think there are two things here, aren't there? There's well, three really. There's an acoustic instrument, which is just recorded, amplified by a remote microphone, microphone on the stand. So we'll call them acoustic completely. And then there is what a lot of people do, which is what I tend to do when performing as well, and that is an acoustic instrument, a normal violin, with some means of picking up sound locally. So I used to use a piezo pickup in the bridge, which is fantastic, because and at the time it suited me more, because at the time I was using that, I was playing at one stage, I was playing in a group with 7 people, and so the volumes in the group are a little bit louder, and tendency to feedback and so on is increased. So having a piezo pickup really reduces the tendency to feedback. And so despite the fact that you're only getting the sound from the bridge, and so you don't get the sort of as much of the warmth and richness that you get from an acoustic instrument, really, it's like a section of the sound almost is the best way to describe it. But still, that's a good compromise in a band situation where feedback resistance is really important. It's great. Okay, so I used to use that, but now I'm trying to remember the last time I played in a group. I did a ceilidh recently with several people in the band, but almost always now I'm playing in a duo, and it's normally fairly relaxed and calm. And so I now use a little lavalier microphone. It's a Audio Technica one I use, but other brands are available, fastened to the tailpiece, and so that is relatively close to the front of the instrument and the bridge, so it gets a powerful audio signal. But the most important thing about that is, as you move about, the microphone stays in the same position in relation to the instrument, so you don't get a sort of change in volume of the sound coming through. So that's the second thing. The third one is a purely electric violin, and personally I just don't like the sound of them. So I tend not to be really very interested in those. But again, you get people using piezo pickups in the bridge, which gives you a sound not dissimilar, or with some of the same kind of characteristic frequency responses to the piezo in the bridge of an acoustic instrument. And then much less common, but you do see them, is electromagnetic pickups, such as those used in electric guitars. And to my ears, they sound a lot better. But nevertheless, it sounds like a completely different instrument to an acoustic violin. So there we go. Was there another part to this question? Yeah, well, I was going to go on and say, and I'm having trouble recollecting the exact terminology here, but I'm sure some of you out there will be thinking, yes, but there is this product called, now what is it? It's let's get this right, but basically it uses computer technology effectively to take the waveform from the signal from the violin and change it, manipulate it in a way which mimics more, a a sort of an expensive acoustic instrument. So people say, oh, you know, I can take my electric violin and make it sound like a Stradivarius. Well, it's pretty easy to tell the difference, in all honesty. Impulse response, that's it. It's suddenly come back in my head, basically. It's called impulse response because the way they record the sound, the response of the acoustic instrument is basically they tap it, you know, normally with a little wooden mallet on a swing, so it's always the same. They put the violin in the cradle, this thing comes around, tock, hits the front of the violin, they record that, and then they use that response to adulterate the, by computer, by software means, the sound of the electric violin or the microphone, whatever they're doing. But I don't know, to me, I've still not heard an electric violin that I preferred to an acoustic violin. Sorry. That's the end of those. There were some questions. There were some questions about comments left on the. I did a video which was just me meandering, chatting away about the musings on a wet Tuesday. It was called. So, yeah, one of the things I mentioned was black bow hair, which I'd been using. Yeah, comment from Helen G again, saying it was pretty scratchy. I went, yeah, it sounds like you had a pretty poor bow generally from what you're saying here. Yeah, I'm still enjoying using the one with the coarser hair at the moment, must admit. DIY Dark Matter 2 days ago. Yeah, he was just basically saying he understood about the. I was just being rather frustrated that I'd made 2 violin necks in a wood that just wasn't up to it, so I had to restart. Some suggestions about the strength of timbers and so on, but in all honesty, maple, ash, beech. There are loads of plenty powerful enough. There are loads of plenty powerful enough, strong enough on me timbers. I've just got to plug in the mains here because it just gives me the low battery warning. Maybe not power supply, you know what I mean. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I had to, I did speak to one of the Patreon sort of subscribers, Doug, and I went through a couple of points with him this week, and I was planning to record that and sort of have a little live question and answer thing which I'd append onto this, but unfortunately with my incredible IT prowess I managed to record the video for the whole discussion between us beautifully but with no sound at all, which it now turns out seems to be an iPhone security thing, so people can't record conversations without other people knowing. But it was interesting. I mean, we talked about a few things. One was rib height, then there was also pretty much the same thing I just mentioned just now about corners on violins. And I did this little sketch for him, saying that effectively, I don't know if you can see that very well, that when you come to mark these out, after you've marked the offset, actually just on the timber, mark like that, just get in there with a pencil and just exaggerate the curves, put them in, cut the corners over length. Then that gives you the option to introduce sort of some really nice shape. What else did he ask about the plans? I think that was pretty much it. You know what? We're up to 25 minutes. I always like to gauge when to stop by the percentage of ums and ahs in my sort of conversation, and we have now reached the point where we're getting to a dangerously high percentage of ums. So let's call it a day there, shall we? If you've got any questions that you'd like answered for next week, please leave them in the comments below. Also, if anyone is interested in having a sort of a live conversation which will then be used as part of one of these, then get in touch and we'll do it. And this time I'll record the sound. Okay, so anyway, that's me. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you soon. Look after yourselves. Cheers, folks. Bye.